This section of the Chapter 10 lecture is titled Nationalism and its Discontents. And the focus question is, what efforts were made in this period to strengthen the economic integration of the nation, and what major crises hindered these efforts? The War of 1812 showed how far the United States was from being an integrated nation. The Bank of the United States had expired, transportation was poor, and manufacturing had been required to counter the British embargo. Even though they wanted the United States to remain Jefferson's agrarian republic, Republicans led by Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun believed manufacturers needed protection if the United States was to become independent from Britain. In 1815, President James Madison proposed a plan for government promoted economic development that became known as the American System. This system would rest on a new national bank, a tariff on imports to protect and foster manufacturing, and federal financing of road and canal construction called internal improvements. Although the Tariff and National Bank became law in 1816, Madison vetoed an internal improvements bill. He was afraid that if the national government were given powers not expressed in the Constitution, it would interfere with individual liberty and slavery in the southern states. The Second Bank of the United States, a private profit-making corporation that served as the government's financial agent, soon became resented by many Americans. The Bank of the United States was also tasked with regulating the volume of paper money printed by private banks to prevent fluctuations and inflation. Today, only the federal government issues paper money, the total of which is determined by the Federal Reserve Bank rather than the amount of gold held at the repository at Fort Knox. During the 19th century, however, paper money consisted of notes promising to pay the bearer a specified amount of specie on demand, and its value was determined by the issuing institution's reputation for stability. Values often fluctuated wildly as banks printed more currency than they held in corresponding specie or hard money, right? Metallic money, gold. Banks relied on public confidence, and the Bank of the United States was supposed to prevent overissuance because it held federal funds in large amounts of currency from various banks. The prospect of the government demanding specie for that currency was intended to guard against banks acting improperly, for if a bank could not provide the specie when asked, it would have to suspend operations. Rather than regulate the currency and loans issued by local banks, the Bank of the United States contributed to widespread speculation, mostly in land, after the War of 1812. When high European demand for American farm goods decreased back to normal levels in 1819, this speculative bubble burst. Falling land prices ruined farmers and businessmen who could no longer pay their loans, banks failed, and unemployment spread in eastern cities. The short-lived Panic of 1819 disrupted the political harmony established after the war's end. Some states controversially provided relief to debtors, much to the chagrin of creditors. Most important, the panic reinforced many Americans' long-standing distrust of banks, and it undermined the reputation of the Bank of the United States, which was blamed for the panic. When states retaliated against the Bank of the U.S. by taxing its local branches, the Supreme Court under John Marshall ruled in McCulloch v. Maryland in 1819 that the Bank of the United States was a legitimate exercise of congressional authority under the Constitution. This directly contradicted the strict constructionist view that Congress could use only those powers expressly given to it in the Constitution. In 1816, James Monroe became president, inaugurating a period of one-party Republican rule, an era of good feelings in which almost no Federalists won federal or state offices. In 1820, Monroe was reelected almost unanimously. With no party opposition, however, politics was organized around competing sectional interests. Slavery was a sectional issue that threatened to disrupt national unity. In 1819, when Missouri applied for statehood, a New York Republican proposed that Congress force the new state constitution to ban the further importation of slaves and to free slave children upon their reaching age 25. The Republican Party split along sectional lines on the Missouri question. Most Northern Republicans supported the restrictions, while Southern Republicans opposed them. In 1820, a compromise was reached that allowed Missouri to adopt a constitution without the anti slavery restrictions and allowed Maine, which prohibited slavery, to become a free state in order to maintain sectional balance between free and slave states in the Congress. In addition, slavery would be prohibited in all remaining territory of the Louisiana Purchase north of latitude 3630. Thomas Jefferson, who had drafted the clause of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 that prohibited slavery north of the Ohio River, strenuously opposed efforts to keep the institution out of Missouri because he viewed the controversy as a Federalist effort to divide the Republican Party. While he was correct that politics rather than morals motivated most Northern congressmen, it was mostly Republicans rather than the few remaining Federalists that voted against slavery in Missouri. By 1820, New York had surpassed Virginia in population, and the state's Republicans advocated emancipation in Missouri. 28 years of Virginia presidents, interrupted only by John Adams of Massachusetts, persuaded many Northerners of undue Southern influence in Washington, with more slave states meaning more Southern congressmen and electoral votes. The Missouri controversy raised the fatal issue of slavery's Western expansion for the first time and revealed widespread sectionalism. John Quincy Adams predicted that dissolution of the Union over the issue of slavery would lead to civil war and the elimination of the institution of slavery overall. But for the time being, the slavery debate faded from national attention once more.